I feel a bit like, because I spend so much time working in Parliament, where you're not allowed to use the word lie in the Commons or the Speaker will have it out with you. I feel like we're not allowed to say that word either, but perhaps we should. Perhaps we should be explicit.
You want everyone to resist the temptation to resign. Well, if he's going, why aren't you?
But you know what, for all our mockery, I think I probably agree with Jeremy Corbyn on more than I do with Keir Starmer.
This is Quite Right, the new podcast from The Spectator. I'm Michael Gove, editor of The Spectator.
And I'm Madeline Grant, assistant editor and parliamentary sketch writer at The Spectator.
And this week, we'll be looking at Rachel Reeves' future. Does she have one? Your party, and what Jeremy Corbyn's travails can tell us about the future of the left. And of course, we'll be discussing with Maddie what you should give your loved one this Christmas. It's nearly 1 week on since the budget, which was, of course, supposed to reset Labour's fortunes, but far from a restoration of Rachel Reeves' authority, it seems as though it's contributed to a further unravelling. She was quite feisty on the day, but since then, there have been a series of revelations, not least from the Office for Budget Responsibility, that suggest that not only was she leaking like a colander before the budget, but she was also almost deliberately manipulating the background in such a way that's led some of her own cabinet colleagues to say that she was deceiving them. Has, of course, been succeeded by the OBR chair himself resigning, though that's more because he oversaw the unfortunate leak of the details.
It's all going so well.
Just minutes before the budget
British
started.
British state is functioning as well as it always does.
And do you think that Rachel is in terminal trouble, Maddie?
I do. I think the thing that protects her at the moment is the fact that her fate is so intimately tied to the Prime Minister's. There will be a feeling that if she goes, much like when Kwasi Kwarteng went, that really did spell the end of Liz Truss. And he's very keen to defend her. So that's the thing that is perhaps working most in her favour at the moment. He called this quite absurd press conference yesterday in which he told assembled journalists at a London nursery that everything was going so brilliantly and he's so proud of the budget and particularly proud of Rachel Reeves. When something like this happens, they're in serious trouble. The game is up. It's just a case of how long. And even if she does stagger on, I think there's been a very palpable and impossible to turn around loss of confidence, I think. I don't know how you turn around from a position like this. And I also don't think they fully understand the extent of what people are angry about. It's not just the explicit lies that the OBR revelations have exposed, but I think throughout the process there's been this kind of serial dishonesty. I would actually say it's a very lawyerly attitude. It basically says, we will do X, but we will include these very specific caveats so that when we're pushed on it in interviews, we can say that actually we didn't do it. So we can be like, the freezing of thresholds is not the same as a tax on working people. But of course, it's this kind of heads-on pin stuff that they think gives them some kind of plausible deniability. But to the public, it just looks like they're being massively economical with the truth. There's a lot of like letter, not spirit going on here. And that's not even in like the top 3 falsehoods that were told by this government around the budget.
No, I thought that the very fact that the Prime Minister felt that he had to mansplain the details of the budget to the country on Monday, far from being a vote of confidence, is basically an acknowledgement that the event itself had not succeeded in resetting things for the government or getting their principal messages across. But the bigger issue, I fear, for her, for Rachel, you're right, is that if you mug someone and take their wallet and then fling it back in their face, and then say, well, actually, technically speaking, when I said that I wouldn't burgle you, I haven't. So you can't complain about this loss of all your earnings. It's casuistry of the worst kind. And actually, I think, compounds the crime for the reasons that you mention. A straightforward acknowledgement that you'd got something wrong and that the country, in order to get back to fiscal balance, required tax increases would be painful and unpopular. But I think it would at least be more commendable than, and I hate to use this phrase, gaslighting the public.
Yeah. And the French phrase "pour mentir, il faut avoir une bonne mémoire." Forgive my pronunciation, but you do have to have a good memory, and you have to know previous lies that you've told, or perhaps exaggerations and falsifications. I feel a bit like, because I spend so much time working in Parliament, where you're not allowed to use the word lie in the Commons, or the Speaker will have it out with you. I feel like we're not allowed to say that word either, but perhaps we should. Perhaps we should be explicit. Darren Jones was sent out on the morning media round yesterday, also to defend the budget, and he let slip that they had inherited from the previous Conservative government like a kind of fiscal headroom of 10 billion, which flatly contradicts the 22 billion black hole that we were hearing about at that time. It's almost like the whole thing is unravelling, and they don't even realise, when someone is sent out to defend one aspect of it, they end up kind of inadvertently destroying another like pillar of the crumbling fortress.
I think it's certainly the case that the procession of different reasons and different justifications for why she acted as she did is a tangled web, to put it mildly. And the fact that at different times it's been the Tories who've been blamed, headwinds from across the Atlantic because of tariffs that have been blamed, the fact that the black hole has contracted and has expanded in size like some curious astronomical phenomenon that defies scientific explanation. All of these things, I think, reinforce a sense of mendacity.
Yes.
She can't stick to one story in order to justify why it was that tax increases were contemplated, and then of a particular kind, income tax increases to the basic rate, and then abandoned.
Do you think... sorry, Michael. I was going to ask, to your mind, does the resignation of Richard Hughes, the head of the OBR, does that make Rachel Reeves' position a bit more secure, in the sense that someone has resigned for something, therefore perhaps the bloodhounds will move on? Or does it actually make it more difficult, because it's like, he did the honourable thing, why won't you?
Yes, it's like a mafioso turning queen's or king's evidence. So you want, even though obviously they've disagreed, you want everyone to resist the temptation to resign. Because far from Richard Hughes's resignation seeming like a sort of propitiation, like a sacrifice that will take the heat off, it actually prompts the question, well, if he's going, why aren't you? If he made a mistake and accepted the consequences, so should you. And the graver problem, I think, for Rachel Reeves is not so much the tangled web that she wove in the run-up to the budget. It is, as you pointed out earlier, that both before the election, when they said that they wouldn't raise taxes, and then after the last budget, when she said that this was a one-off, a single set of tax increases that would not need to be replicated, that she's gone back on both of those. So the fundamental dishonesty in the eyes of the public, and in my eyes too, is that the election was won on a false prospectus. The last budget was sold in a disingenuous fashion. And to compound it, the tax increases, we now know, are there to pay for increased benefits, and increased benefits through lifting the two-child benefit cap that are profoundly unpopular. And that's why I think the most telling attack still is the one that Kemi Badenoch made, which is that this is a budget for Benefit Street.
Yeah, I felt that too. It seemed to land in the chamber, and it appeared on many of the newspaper headlines the following day. I think it does tap into a profound sense of unfairness, which Labour may be liable to forget, especially if they're listening to backbenchers to the left of the party who are already angered about all sorts of other things, and saw this as an opportunity to kind of exact a price for their continued loyalty. It's natural that a left-leaning Labour MP would call for this, but I was actually very surprised when I saw the polling, because there was part of me that thought that, for example, after lockdown, that had entrenched the role of the state in such a way that we could never return to it, that people expect the state to do more and more. And I assumed that the child benefit would actually be a popular move, but it's not.
No.
Beyond two children. And I think it's that point of, actually, you can dig out all sorts of statistics by comparing scenarios where a working family who are not on benefits have to be earning a really sizable sum of money before they are outpacing a family on welfare. And that cannot be right. It cannot be right that you have to be earning in the mid-60s or 70s to keep pace.
Completely. The introduction of the two-child benefit cap, like any reduction in benefits, will always have hard edges. And so there will always be a case for saying it is not this child's fault that they've been born to this family. Why should the decisions of the father and mother be visited on the child? It should be appropriate for the state to ensure that that child doesn't grow up in poverty. But for most of the public, the view, I think, will be clearer. I can't have children, or I can't afford to have children.
Yes.
Partly because I'm paying so much in tax. Now, my ability to have the family that I want is further restricted and compromised by the fact that I'm paying more in tax.
Yes.
And this tax is going to those people who can't be bothered to work. Because the broader challenge is the moral case that Labour themselves made on benefits was the bill needs to be reduced because we need to get more people in work. And there's a straightforward retreat from that principle, even though Starmer on Monday was saying, oh, benefits reform will come. The revealed preference of the Labour Party is not to cut, but to increase benefits.
Yes.
And this particular benefits increase seems, it couldn't be designed more blatantly to say to the working population, you have to make a double sacrifice. You've got to pay more and you've got to restrict your own family size so that other people can have their families grow and be subsidised by you. There's an additional and toxic element as well, which is, as Nick Timothy, the Conservative MP, has pointed out, many of the beneficiaries will be people who were not born in the UK, parents rather, who were not born in the UK, and who have not contributed. And again, you can't have a discriminatory welfare system. A child that is born in this country, wherever their parents came from, is entitled to state support, of course. But it doesn't make it easier if you're a bricklayer in Bolton and you and your partner are wondering whether or not you can afford to have a second child, to see your taxes going to people who've come to this country in the last few years and whose family size is growing and who are not just ahead of you in the queue for social housing, but now having their fecundity subsidised by you.
And the fact is that I know socialists don't like this fact, but individuals do respond to economic incentives.
Yes.
We already have an incredibly complicated system of where tax credits, income tax thresholds and all sorts of other things. And it increasingly makes sense for many individuals who might like to take on more work. It's genuinely not economical for them to go above a certain number of hours. We have just massively increased the incentive not to work. And I don't blame people who would take advantage of this because they're simply following the incentives that have been established for them by politicians. But make no mistake, that is what is going to happen. And it's a further, as you say, it's a further insult to those who are scrimping and saving and still turning up to work. Because frankly, for many people, they might well be better off on benefits.
Yes, and of course, there was an implicit recognition of this from the government because they recognised that the cost of living is hitting people, and they talked about the steps that they'd taken, reducing energy bills, freezing rail fares, and also the further extension of free school meals as well. If one were to look at each of those things, freezing rail fares, again, one can't object per se, but it's not the case that the majority of people travel to work by rail. Secondly, the whole point about the need to subsidise energy bills, or rather to reduce them, by removing these green levies, that is a direct consequence of the government's own policy. So what they're basically saying is, well, we've piled additional costs on energy in order to fund Ed Miliband's drive for net zero and the decarbonisation of the grid and the establishment of renewables. But we're going to apply just a little less pain than we might otherwise have done. We still have some of the highest energy prices in the developed world. But that still hits industry in areas like steel and ceramics. So, for this relief, no thanks, I imagine most people will be saying. And again, the impression that the government wants to create is that help with the cost of living comes as a result of the largesse of the government and its generosity, when help with the cost of living should come from the government taking less of your money and bearing down on inflation itself.
Oh, damn. I wish the last Conservative government could have listened to a word of what you just said, Michael, because I agree with everything. Another thing I noticed yesterday, Starmer's really bizarre address at the nursery, was that he was talking about other forms of inequality too. So it wasn't just about material poverty, but he was talking about the outrage and how furious he was that things like children turning up to kindergarten not yet potty trained and still wearing nappies and this sort of thing. Now, I find that really baffling, because he seems to think that if you give parents more money, that problem will simply go away. The Breakfast Club idea seems to be predicated on I feel like the justification for that is slightly unravelling. You know, the Department for Education put out this video where they interviewed various random talking heads, parents, and asking them how they would spend the extra time they get from sending their kid to a breakfast club. And it was all like, I'll potter around the house, I'll have a lie-in and stuff. And I thought the point was that busy working parents could drop off the kids and then go straight to work.
Yes.
But it's like I do think there's, you were saying about the level of statism. I think there's an idea that we can no longer discuss parenting.
No, I thought this was the craziest video that had been produced by the government so far in a tough field, contested field, crazier than any of Keir Starmer's own videos, including the letter he sent to his own son. It was, as you say, a series of interviews about the extension of free breakfast clubs at schools, in which parents were asked how they would use the extra 30 minutes. One of them said, I'll go off and have a coffee. Another remarked on how difficult it was to know in a busy morning whether or not you'd actually fed your own children, and the wonderful thing about breakfast clubs. This is completely maladjusted as a justification for breakfast clubs. There is a way in which you can say that getting children to arrive at school early, making sure that they are school ready, providing them with high quality nutrition is worthwhile. But this is absurd because it's couched in, as though the hedonic principle were applying to parents' times, rather than thinking about what is in the best interests of the child and their ability to learn. More broadly, this government, when it's talked about schools, has talked about the extension of free school meals. Fine. The establishment of breakfast clubs. Okay. But it hasn't actually talked about what's happening in schools. Bridget Phillipson seems to be prouder of her record as a caterer than as an educator. And I don't want to deprecate, well, I do actually,
I think you do.
This activity. It is a displacement activity for concentrating on what is happening in schools and educating children appropriately. It is all very well to say that you need to tackle some of the reasons why children aren't in school, that you need to make sure that children are ready to learn. Yes, but these are ancillary to the purpose of school, which is to provide children with a structured environment in which to learn and to concentrate on what they're learning.
But don't you think, actually, for some time I feel like politics has felt like pretty febrile, but often there haven't been massive points of disagreement between the main parties. And actually, I think on this front, there's now a real fault line opening up between Labour and I guess between Reform and the Tories as well. Because although I don't know what Reform's view on this has been, because I haven't seen as much of their attacks. But I think that this idea that, that we can still use the phrase, for example, bad parenting.
Yes.
If you haven't potty trained your child, that's on you. It's not a failure of the government to do these most basic requirements that at no point in human history would we have thought were the provision of the state. And also that we, the we Reform, we, the Tories, we're on the side of the person who's grafting and working hard. It almost reminded me of kind of like coalition era talking points.
Yes, I think that's true. It was certainly the case, of course, that the two-child benefit cap was introduced at the time of the coalition by George Osborne. And the whole thrust of benefits reform then, when Ian Duncan Smith was Secretary of State at the Department of Work and Pensions, was to make work pay, to incentivise people going into work, and deeply contested though the Conservative record is, more than 1 million jobs were created, or 1 million new jobs were added to the economy, not as the direct result of government policy, but the people filling those jobs were incentivized to do so. And I think you're absolutely right on these two central points. One, incentives matter, and the benefit system, the tax system, should be there to incentivize people to work. If you whack people by saying that they're automatically going to be dragged into higher tax rates, you disincentivize work. If you increase benefits, then you disincentivize work. And also, if you provide an alibi for poor parenting by saying it is the state's job, then you compound the problems that we have in the taking of parental responsibility. Because again, the problem that we have post-COVID in this country in terms of school attendance is worse than in many other countries.
Yeah.
And I'm a terrible hardliner here. I actually think that if your child is persistently absent, that child benefit should be withdrawn. It is your responsibility as a parent to make sure that your child goes to school. We hear now about school avoidant children, and new conditions are invented in order to explain away truancy. It is your responsibility as a parent to make sure that your child is educated. And I don't care what sort of alphabet soup of conditions you invent in order to justify your child's absence or to make it easier. Yes, it is difficult, but it's your job.
Over the weekend, we had the inaugural conference of your party, and we know that that is the name because it has finally been determined by a vote of the members there. This is the new party founded by Zarah Sultana and Jeremy Corbyn. The conference in Liverpool seems to me an absolute delight. Every kind of tanky, swampy opinion represented there, kafirs for days, etc. But it seems to have resulted in major divisions emerging between even the two founders of the movement. Is there a future for your party? And what does this mean for the British political landscape?
It seems as though the Your Party conference was almost designed, scripted, by a collective of satirists from the last 30 years. It was almost as though the lines from the life of Brian about the Judeans People's Front and the People's Front of Judea were being recycled. It seemed as though almost every cliche of far left excess, dating back to Robert Lindsay as Citizen Smith, was being revived. It seemed as though all of the 80s depictions of Greenham common women were being updated in order for us to have this wonderful festival, not even of wokery, but this wonderful festival of far left self-indulgence. But you're right, there is an added element to it. So what makes the Your Party infighting so vicious is that it's not just a fight between one faction of the extreme left and another faction of the extreme left, between the Trots and the Stalinists, between the socialist workers and the revolutionary communists. There is also an Islamist element there as well, because the 4 independents, Gaza independents, who were elected and who formed a parliamentary group with Jeremy Corbyn, are themselves split. So you have two
of them have left, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the MP for Dewsbury and the MP for Blackburn, who were both elected on this Gaza independent, sort of broadly Islamist ticket, have split from Your Party because they have quite socially conservative views, and there is a big division. Zarah Sultana is the sort of purist in this, in that she almost welcomes the departure of people whom she believes are misogynistic, heteronormative, and of course, the greatest sin of all, transphobic. There are still 2 of those independents, including the MP Ayub Khan, the Birmingham MP, who was behind the campaign to prevent Maccabi Tel Aviv Israeli fans attending an Aston Villa match.
Yeah.
He's still, as far as I can tell, at time of broadcast, in the Your Party family. But I can't imagine, though I don't know him personally, so he's very free to write in and correct me, I can't imagine that he's entirely happy with the pro-trans and radical left position that Zarah Sultana and her colleagues have, even though, of course, he goes a bundle on anti-Zionist and anti-austerity riffs as well.
I actually was surprised in a way by what I heard from Zarah Sultana, because I see her in the Commons a lot. She's obviously extremely left-wing. I hadn't realised that she was like a full Stalinist kind of thing. Like she wants basically every aspect of the economy to be nationalised. She also, it's not just the utilities, the rail, it's things like the food production, you know, we'll have liquidate the kulaks and let's take the collective farm. I kind of hadn't realised that. And what's actually one of the things that has most entertained me, because you're right, if you're a sketch writer, it most definitely is your party, you know, is the fact that Jeremy Corbyn is now starting to look like a centrist.
Yes.
He's like the centrist dad of this party.
He was being attacked
for
being insufficiently anti-Zionist.
It's amazing because after, you almost have to feel a bit sorry for Jeremy Corbyn, like after being booted out of the Labour Party.
Yeah, it's like the revolution turning on Robespierre.
Totally. It's exactly like that, sort of, you know, being widely accused of dragging the Labour Party into anti-Semitism. He's now got people on stage yelling at him for not being sufficiently anti-Semitic.
I know.
It would take a heart of stone not to laugh.
I know. Someone quipped that the fact that they voted not to have either Jeremy Corbyn or Zarah Sultana as leader meant that Jeremy Corbyn was present but not involved.
Very good.
In your party, which of course is an echo of what he said when a wreath was laid in order to commemorate Palestinian terrorists. And he claimed, of course, that his presence there didn't necessarily mean endorsement. But to be fair to Jeremy Corbyn, there hasn't been a single anti-imperialist cause to which he has not attached himself during his long career. And for him now to be denounced by a rising generation of would-be Zoran Mamdanis for being insufficiently radical must be chastening. But it's, I think, a mistake to believe that simply because this conference was ludicrous and divisive, and because Zarah Sultana hasn't yet met an extremist position that she didn't want to embrace and hug, that your party are an electoral irrelevance. Because even without a party organisation, 4 independents were elected last time round. And I think what you may have at the next general election is a willingness amongst some, in particular constituencies, to vote for what they would consider to be the best left alternative to Labour. I think in many seats that will be the Greens, and Zach Polanski, to whom we might turn in a moment, will certainly be chortling at your party's implosion, because it increases the credibility of the Greens as the alternative to Labour. But in seats like West Streetings, or in Birmingham, or indeed in Keir Starmer's own seat, it may well be the case that an independent candidate with a bit of your party, organisation and energy behind them will pose a significant threat to the incumbent Labour MP.
Yeah. I see your party as a bit of a kind of ghost of Christmas future for various other parties. For the Greens, perhaps? I mean, what I'm often astonished by is if you look at where the Greens won seats, it's quite actually, they've got 4 seats, but they're quite different places. You've got classic studenty, hard left areas, sort of Bristol, Brighton, Pavilion. You've got those sorts of places, but then you've also got absolute Tory heartlands in Norfolk and Herefordshire, or what were once Tory heartlands. I know ex-Tories who are really fed up with the last 14 years and they care very much about their rivers and streams, and they don't follow politics that closely, but they voted Green because they hear Green and they think, oh, I'm a conservationist, I care about my compost. And you're like, no, you have just voted for some like proper tanky communists. But not everyone follows politics closely, and fair play to them.
The Greens have, over time, had some surprising people voted for them and have adopted some surprising positions. So Nigel Farage voted Green in 1989 because they were the party that was most opposed to the European Union. Jenny Jones, my colleague in the House of Lords, was a strong supporter of Brexit. She's, I think, the first Green peer, or the first person to be selected by the Greens as a peer. I think there was an hereditary peer who briefly took the Green whip, if indeed there is such a thing. But Zach Polanski, who himself is a former Liberal Democrat, spends most of his time, and I can see why electorally, talking about taxing billionaires and increasing state spending, not on the environment. I mean, I don't know if you can tell a chaffinch from a bullfinch, but it's surprising that there's been so little, when there are a number of environmental concerns that one might address, so little on the environment from Zach Polanski. And I would hope, but I suspect it may be a vain hope, that those people who voted Green last time round because they wanted to clean up our rivers might recognise that it's now essentially a radical left, quasi-Marxist party. But I suspect it may still be the case that there'll be a sentimentality towards certain Green candidates because they will seem to be like the sort of, local RSPB member who is shuffled forward to secure election on the basis of safeguarding our pleasant countryside, when in fact for Zach Polanski, they are foot soldiers in the Leninist vanguard he leads.
And it's also important that to avoid giving that impression, these sorts of internal disputes within the party are actually very important.
Yes.
It's not possible for parties to coast on vibes forever, and especially if they gain more seats and more of a platform in Parliament, greater scrutiny, etc., etc. There's also part of me that's like, how much did the Conservatives really deserve to be in charge for 14 years? And how much of it was just the factionalism and stupidity of their opponents?
I think it was undoubtedly the case that the Labour Party suffered as a result of allowing the head-body distinction to be biased increasingly in favour of the body. So the activists, and indeed the fact that the Labour Party for a period allowed people to sort of join for a nominal fee and to become registered supporters, meant that the residual wisdom exercised by experienced parliamentarians and the more moderate type of trade union leader was overwhelmed by the activist surge. And therefore, what one saw was certainly enthusiasm for the Corbyn agenda, as all of the membership and all of the people who'd joined as registered supporters swept in behind him. You had an organisation created momentum, you had electricity, but what you did not have was credibility. And that is always a danger for political movements, because while you want to harness the enthusiasm and energy of the ardent, ultimately, when you're governing, you have to govern in the interests of the whole country. That was definitely not the case in the Corbyn approach between 2017 and 2019, hence one of the reasons why they did so badly then. And I think even when Ed Miliband went to the country in 2015, the sense then was that the Labour Party was adrift from the natural governing coalition that it had had in the past, which included some more hard-headed and realist elements. So the big mistake, which of course your party I think is recreating, is to see the fervour of your membership, to see the energy and electricity that your activists bring, and to assume that that will somehow galvanise millions across the country to support you, when in fact a greater degree of sobriety is a requirement to be taken seriously, particularly in difficult times as a leader.
But you know what, for all our mockery, I think I probably agree with Jeremy Corbyn on more than I do with Keir Starmer. Jeremy Corbyn would not have done the family farm tax. Jeremy Corbyn, I think, would have tried to do the Chagos deal, but it would have gone wrong because, he'd have made he'd have put Ken Livingstone as the Attorney General, and then the negotiations wouldn't have got very far, and maybe the Foreign Office would have blocked it because it was Corbyn doing it, not one of the sensibles. They were robust on assisted dying. They actually care about civil liberties. When it comes to, for example, during lockdown, some of the only MPs that were ever voting against any of it was that unlikely coalition of the kind of libertarian Tories, the Desmond Swains, Steve Bakers, etc. Mark Harper, exactly. And people like Jeremy Corbyn, Dawn Butler, they actually, and they don't want things like digital ID cards. In a way, it's kind of, I don't know, I find that there is a greater consistency and there is more to admire there. Perhaps I'm being too sort of rose-tinted here because right now they don't look like actually being in power.
I think that it is certainly the case that Parliament is better for having radical left voices that will take a position, including on civil liberties questions, that is suspicious of executive overreach. I absolutely agree with that. But if I were, which I've often fantasized about, a hard right member of the Labour Party, my contempt for these people would be limitless. But there is something about that tradition that I do admire, patriotic, pro-NATO, scornful of leftist self-indulgence, determined to support Britain's industrial base, more alert to the dangers of communism because it threatens a sensible labour movement than anyone else.
Yes.
And so for them, for that tradition, I suppose you could even say Ed Balls represents it to an extent. Dennis Healey certainly did, even though he was a communist in his youth. For that tradition, the Corbyn people are self-indulgent because their identification with radical left causes abroad, Venezuelan liberation, etc., and their flirtation with communism renders the labour movement unreliable in the eyes of most working people, and therefore inhibits the capacity of a Labour government to be elected and to do the right thing. And therefore, I can see the romance, but actually,
we're not comparing Jeremy Corbyn with that Labour tradition, which I agree is a fine and noble one, but it's not currently in charge of the Labour Party.
No, it's not.
What we have is lawyerism.
Yes.
We have a sort of like this terrible kind of, I'm sort of so terribly clever, but actually this proceduralism. I'm afraid we have to do manifestly insane things like paying a China-allied country to take British sovereign territory off our hands.
Yes.
Because this court said so. And even if we have very reasonable objections, we will not answer your objections because it's enough that I have this scrap of paper that no other country would have bothered to listen to. That is the level of insanity. In a way, Jeremy Corbyn, again, for me, he's recognisably part of a British tradition.
He is.
He's part of that kind of, I guess, like almost a Levellers or even the Diggers tradition.
Completely.
You can place him within that tradition. Whereas to me, Keir Starmer is a man who lacks any kind of hinterland. His hinterland goes back to maybe the Maastricht Treaty or the founding of the NHS. Whereas I think Jeremy Corbyn maybe could talk to you a bit more about interesting. Maybe I'm being too generous to him.
No, I think
he could definitely tell us a lot about revolutions in other countries. You know, he's forgotten more about Che Guevara than I will ever know.
No,
in a way, I'd rather listen to that than lawyerism.
I do sympathise. There is a non-conformist radical left tradition. Tony Benn's the best exemplar of it. It looks back to the Levellers and the Diggers. It draws on the writings of people like Tom Paine. It looks to the ethical socialists of the late 19th century as well, Owen, Ruskin, and so on. And it does actually have, in its own particular way, a love for a particular strain of Britain's traditions. And for me, unless your politics are rooted in a tradition and preferably a British tradition, then there will always be something, deficient in them, to my mind. So therefore, I do agree with that because Starmer's position is interchangeable, human rightsy, social democratic-y mush. And you can see Starmerite politicians in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, France, Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, everywhere. It is a single transferable economist leader view of the world. So in that sense, Corbyn is preferable. But I'm going to say that in our tour d'horizon of the left overall, if it still counts as left, then what I would like to see on the left, perhaps unsurprisingly, is a relentlessly patriotic, energetically interventionist, Ernie Bevan-style hard right Labour Party that was scornful of this type of self-indulgence, and which also, as indeed Labour was between 1945 and 51, opposed to the European community being formed and opposed to the European Convention on Human Rights. Last week, rashly, I said that we would try to offer our listeners some advice on Christmas gift giving, Maddie, I hesitate to offer my own views on what you should want to receive and what you should want to give this Christmas, but I will. But before I do, the principle, which is Maddie Grant's sound Christmas gift-giving list, I think could go viral. It could become even bigger than the...
I hope not. I don't want to be on the prevent scheme.
No. It could be even bigger than Nicky Haslam's NAF list. So I promise, going to make some recommendations. But what I want to tease out of you, Maddie, is both what should one be contemplating giving and what are the principles behind it. So if you want the recipient of your gifts to know that you are sound, what should they be?
I think generally what I like to get for Christmas is, I think, books and socks. You just cannot go wrong with books and socks. You need cozy things, and it's a time when you get to sit around and read and be lazy, which one of the things I most love about Christmas is there's not that feeling of must do this, must do that, or at least that's how I do Christmas. I'm sure there are people who do it differently. I guess a good walk on Boxing Day is one thing, but then you ultimately do want to return to the hearth and go back to lolling around.
I think that the principle of idleness, rest, is a good one. I think that the choice of gift that you give, in my mind, should be guided by respect for that.
I said earlier, for me, I think you want to have a number of new books on Christmas Day that you can maybe start reading there and then and see you through till New Year's Eve. Did you have any particular recommendations?
Well, I am a skeptic about new books. My view is that in giving books to others, they should ideally be a book that you can personally recommend because you've read it yourself, or someone that you really, really trust has read it, and so you can pass it on to the recipient with confidence. So, there's a natural tendency to say, oh, it's the Booker Prize winner. Therefore, though I have actually this year, I think for the first time in a million years,
too.
read David Joly.
Is that how you pronounce it?
Joly. Anyway, David S-Z-A-L-A-Y, Hungarian name.
David S.
David S. His novel Flesh is good. I have read it. I would recommend it. But I think that the ideal book to give is one that you've cherished yourself, that you know that the other person probably hasn't read, but would delight in. So I am at the moment only halfway through Little Dorrit, one of the least fashionable Dickens novels, but it's brilliant. I don't know if you've read it, Maddie.
A long time ago. I think I read it. We had to read it as part of my university course.
I would, if you want to have, as I say, I'm halfway through, if you want to have an absorbing 800-pager, then I would definitely recommend it for someone who may be going on a long flight to the Caribbean, or someone who wants to snuggle up for 3 or 4 days on end and to lose themselves in a read. But if you want a pacier, starker, more modern tale, then I think Flesh by David S. Would equally well do.
Well, I think there's something very Christmassy about many Dickens, not just Christmas Carol, but there's something... Dickens is a man who understands, because he's focusing on poverty, I think there's often a weird sort of coziness because he often contrasts the slums and the misery with some kind of very heartwarming domestic scene. He quite likes a kind of... what's her name from Oliver Twist? Mrs. Bedwin, if you remember Mrs. Bedwin. She is, I think, Mr. Brownlow's housekeeper, and she sort of welcomes Oliver in. There's something very kind of hospitable about Dickens. I love, don't you love Mr. Wemmick from Great Expectations, with his little kind of miniature castle, with its...
He does domesticity brilliantly.
Yes, he does. And that's so why I always return to him at Christmas.
And the descriptions of meals or home life are wonderful. In Little Dorrit, I'm only halfway through, as I say, he also does villainy superbly. And the Myrtles are, I don't know how things will turn out, but so far they have a chilling air of villainy, which is reassuring. And also he manages to make the air of suppressed menace about some of the characters superb. And then he turns and takes you back to a place of safety, which you hope some of the heroines may eventually find their way in. So there is suspense, malice, but also the comfort of home there. And I think that, of course, Dickens is melodramatic, but I do think that that's the sort of thing that a perfect Christmas read should provide. In terms of non-fiction, Maddie, do you happen to know anyone who may have written a wonderful historical guide, which at a time when we might be thinking of religion, would be the perfect book to have by the fireside, possibly divided into a dozen or so chapters, and possibly one which means that you can read one of those chapters for half an hour while others are in the kitchen, and then 2 or 3 later in the day? Any such book come to mind?
There is this new Dermot McCulloch. No. My husband, Fergus Butler-Galley, he's written a wonderful book, which I'm obviously going to shamelessly plug here. It's a history of Christianity told through different churches around the world. And it's a very ambitious book because he'll take you to a church that's, say, in Africa or Greece or wherever, but that it will quickly sort of expand out from there, and it's remarkable how much is covered in. I wouldn't say it's a short book, but it's not exactly a massively long book, but it's beautifully written. I'm very proud of him having written it on top of his day job. I also read, I think there were 3 kind of ecclesiastical style books that I really enjoyed this year. One of them I haven't finished yet, but it's Rage of Party by George Owers, who I think is an occasional listener to our podcast. I cannot rate that highly enough. It's about the initial fights between Whig and Tory and how that really came to intensify during the reign of Queen Anne, and how that paves the way for I don't know if it's anymore a 2-party system, but our party system until recently. Yes. And there's a wonderful book called God is an Englishman. Have you read this yet?
By Bijan Omrani.
That's right, yes. Absolutely wonderful book. I cannot recommend them highly enough.
I think George Owers and Bijan Omrani are both brilliant writers, and I know that they're both relatively young, so we can expect more from them in the future. And I think that George's book shows that politics was just as scandal-ridden and venomous at the beginning of the 18th century as it ever is now. But the characters were, simply rhetorically more distinguished. And Bijan Omrani's book is a fantastic history of this country and how Christianity is interwoven into so much of what we take for granted.
Yes. This year it's my first Christmas with my baby niece. My brother and his wife had a baby in the summer, and she's absolutely beautiful. She's a bit young for reading, but on her behalf, I've started stockpiling Ladybird books, history. Oh. Did you? I was basically raised on them, and it really exactly. It really, for me, it really developed like a very strong interest in history from a young age, because it tells history in a kind of interesting narrative way with memorable stories and beautiful illustrations, memorable images, that I think from then on you want to learn more, and then you can perhaps upgrade to more in-depth history. But in terms of sparking a childhood interest, I really, even now, I can still remember all of the illustrations from my Queen Elizabeth Ladybird book.
Warwick the Kingmaker.
Oh yeah, that one was amazing. They're obviously out of print for some time, so I've been getting them on eBay, and I've got about 8 now. I'm hoping I'll have the full set by the time she can read.
Perfect recommendation for any publisher. Just simply reprint the entire Ladybird history section. They will, I'm sure, be snapped up, because you're absolutely right. Straightforward narrative, rooted in fact, designed to convey to the reader the essential facts of every great life. Unfashionable, because they're about heroes and heroines, even though those heroes and heroines can sometimes be stained by villainy.
Yeah.
But because the broad trend of historical times, or historical study, I should say at the moment, is away from the idea of the hero or heroine, they've fallen out of fashion. And also because they tell a story of predominantly, but not exclusively, British history including Robert the Bruce, which is noble. Again, they run counter to the spirit of our times. But if you want to get your child hooked on history, then there are a few better starting points. I should also say that actually, to be fair, there is a series, which I think Penguin have published, of short biographies of monarchs, which they would probably hate to have compared to Ladybird books. They're pitched at a higher level, but they have something of the same appeal. They're a mixed bag in the best sense of the word. But let me recommend Tom Holland's Athelstan. So Anglo-Saxon king, recently the focus of renewed attention thanks to the advocacy of Alex Burkhardt, MP, himself a historian. But Tom Holland's Athelstan I would heartily recommend.